I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Those words spilled out of me in a Paris press room in 1924. Fresh off winning gold in the 400 meters, my legs still buzzing with the roar of the crowd. But 6 months later, I stood on the fog-shrouded dock in Glasgow, the salt stinging my eyes, and wondered if I'd ever feel that pleasure again. My mother's hand pressed against my cheek, her thumb wiping away a tear I didn't know I'd shed. My father, a veteran missionary to China, gave me a firm nod, no words needed, just the weight of a legacy I was now carrying. The wooden deck of the SS Mongolia creaked under my boots as I stepped aboard, the cold planks a stark contrast to the warm grass of the Olympic track. Behind me, the crowd of well-wishers blurred into the mist, coaches begging me to reconsider, friends shaking their heads, fans holding signs that read, "Run for Scotland." But in my chest there was a quieter roar, a call that had been growing louder since I was a boy. Sitting in my father's study, flipping through his mission journals, staring at photos of Chinese children with dark eyes and grinning faces, I felt like I was tearing myself in two, leaving behind the fame, the adoration, the life everyone expected me to lead, and stepping into a void of unknowns. The ship pulled away, and I leaned against the rail, watching Glasgow shrink into the gray. I whispered a prayer, my voice cracking, "Lord, if this is your will, give me the strength to keep running, even if it's not on a track." That call didn't come out of nowhere. It started when I was 16, sitting in a Sunday school class in Edinburgh, listening to a missionary talk about the streets of Tianjin. The room was stuffy, the smell of old hymnals and lemon polish hanging in the air, but when he showed a photo of a group of kids huddled around a mud stove, my chest tightened like someone had squeezed it. That night I knelt beside my bed, the floor cold against my knees, and felt something shift in my soul like an earthquake, quiet but powerful, rearranging everything I thought I wanted. I spent the next 6 years wrestling with it, training for races at dawn, studying theology by night, practicing Mandarin until my tongue felt like it was tied in knots. My coach called me crazy, said I was throwing away a once-in-a-lifetime chance to be a legend. Even some of my church friends questioned me, why leave Scotland for a place where you'll be a stranger, where you might not even survive? But every time I doubted, I'd go back to that photo, to the eyes of those kids, and I'd hear God's voice, "Go. I am with you." The night before I left, I packed my Olympic gold medal in a wooden box, tucked it under my bed, and told myself I'd never look at it again. I didn't want it to be a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I was gaining, a purpose bigger than any race. Stepping off the ship in Tianjin in 1925 was like stepping into another world. The heat hit me like a fist, thick and humid, carrying the smell of coal smoke, fried dough, and something sharp and bitter that I later learned was opium. The streets were a chaos of noise, gongs clanging, vendors shouting, children crying, rickshaws rattling over cobblestones. People stared at me, their eyes wide with curiosity. My blonde hair, my tall frame, my Western clothes made me a spectacle. My new home was a small mud brick house on the edge of the city with a dirt floor, a straw mat for a bed, and a hole in the wall that served as a window. There was no running water, no electricity, just a small stove where I could boil water for tea. I collapsed on the mat that first night, exhausted and overwhelmed, and wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The Olympic track felt like a distant dream, a world of comfort and applause that I'd left behind for this dirt, this noise, this loneliness. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of rats scurrying across the floor, and whispered, "Lord, what have you brought me to?" I knew if I was going to make a difference, I had to become one of them. So I cut my hair short, like the local men, and traded my Western suits for a blue cotton tunic and trousers. I learned to eat congee for breakfast, spicy noodles for lunch, and fermented vegetables for dinner, even when my stomach churned and my tongue burned. Learning Mandarin was the hardest part. The tones twisted my tongue into knots, and I often said the wrong thing. Once, I tried to tell a street vendor I wanted water, but accidentally said, "Dog," and he laughed so hard he dropped his basket. But the locals were kind. They corrected me gently, repeating words until I got them right. After a year, I could hold a basic conversation, And one day, I stood in a village square, surrounded by a small crowd of farmers and children, and shared the gospel in broken Mandarin. My voice shook, my hands were sweaty, but when I finished, an old man stepped forward, his face lined with wrinkles, and said, "I understand. I want to know this God you talk about." In that moment, I felt the same thrill I'd felt when crossing the finish line in Paris, maybe even stronger. It wasn't about the applause. It was about connecting with someone, about showing them the love of God. That's when I realized I was still running, just on a different track. The Valley of Shadows came in 1937 when the Japanese invaded China. War broke out, and the streets of Tianjin turned into a battlefield. My wife Florence took our 2 daughters to Canada, where they'd be safe, but I stayed. I couldn't leave the people I'd grown to love, the children I'd taught, the families I'd prayed with. But as the war dragged on, things got worse. My church was destroyed in a bombing, my house was looted, and I got sick with malaria. I lay in a small room, feverish, sweating through my clothes, and felt God's silence like a heavy blanket over me. I screamed at him, my voice hoarse. "Why are you silent? Why have you left me here? I gave up everything for you. My fame, my family, my comfort, and this is what I get." I felt like a failure, like all my sacrifices had been for nothing. For weeks I didn't pray, didn't read the Bible, didn't even get out of bed. I was lost in the dark, and I didn't know if I'd ever find my way out. The breakthrough came in the Weihsien Internment Camp, where I was taken in 1943. The camp was crowded, dirty, and full of fear, but I started organizing running races for the kids. I'd draw a track in the dirt with a stick, and we'd run until we were breathless, laughing and shouting. One day, a young boy named Lee came up to me. He was quiet, his eyes hollow, and I learned he'd lost his parents in the war. I sat with him on a stone wall, sharing a piece of hard bread, and told him about Jesus, about how God loves us, even when things are hard. That night, Lai came to my barracks, his hands trembling, and said, "I want to follow Jesus." We filled a metal tub with cold water, and I baptized him right there, in front of a small group of prisoners. As I lowered him into the water, I saw the light return to his eyes, a smile spreading across his face. In that moment, I felt God's presence again, warm, gentle, and undeniable. The silence was broken, and I knew all the pain, all the sacrifice was worth it. This was the purpose I'd been called to. When the Japanese offered me a chance to leave the camp, to go back to Canada to be with my family, I said no. I couldn't abandon the people in the camp, the kids who needed someone to run with, the prisoners who needed hope. I realized that Sheming wasn't about being a hero. It was about loving God and loving others so much that you're willing to give up everything for them. I was tired, I was sick, but I knew my place was here. Every morning I led worship in the camp, singing hymns in Mandarin and English. Every afternoon I ran with the kids, drawing tracks in the dirt, laughing until my sides hurt. I didn't know how much time I had left, but I didn't care. I was doing what God had called me to do, and that was enough. Now, lying in this cold camp bed, my body weak from a malignant brain tumor, I look back on my life. I think about the Olympic track, the gold medal, the crowds cheering. But what I remember most is the face of Lai, the old man in the village square, the kids running in the dirt. Was it worth it? Every single second. I gave up fame for purpose, comfort for love, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. And to you watching this, what are you running for? Is it fame, money, comfort? Or is there a purpose bigger than yourself? A call that's been whispering in your ear? Don't ignore it. Run boldly toward it, even if it means leaving everything behind. Because when you run for God's purpose, you'll feel His pleasure like nothing else in the world.